Good day, everyone. I am Gestalt Psychology from DSS Social Studies, and welcome to my review. So for today's video, we're going to discuss about the Gestalt Psychology and its principles under the Unit 3.2 Cognitive Perspective. So without further ado, let's start. So let us define what is Gestalt Psychology. Gestalt Psychology is a German word that roughly means configuration. So when we say configuration, it is a complete shape or the way things are put together to form a whole object. A core belief in the Gestalt Psychology is a holism. So holism, or that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. When we say Gestalt, it is a unified whole. So when we say unified, it is a group or it grouped together as a whole. It is a school of thought that looks at the human and behavior as a whole. When trying to make sense of the world around us, Gestalt Psychology suggests that we do not simply focus on every small components. Instead, our minds tends to perceive objects as parts of a greater whole and as elements of more complex system. This school of psychology play a major role in the development of human sensation and perception. So in short, we have to see the whole rather than of its parts. The concept of Gestalt applies to everything, on objects, ideas, human relationships, or a thinking processes. So it means that it talks about all the things that might exist in this nature, that it might be an ideas, an objects, human relationships, and the thinking processes. There are three major Gestalt psychologists: Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kafka, and Wolfgang Kohler. So I will discuss about some of their contributions in this Gestalt theory.
Max Wertheimer, 1880 to 1943. He was the founder of Gestalt Psychology, born in Prague in 1880. Studying at University of Frankfurt, he became aware of a form of apparent motion that was called phi phenomenon. The phi phenomenon is when two or more lights are in close proximity to each other, flashing alternately, appear to be one light moving back and forth. Therefore, the whole was different from the separate parts. For example, in this object, we perceive that it has a continuous motion between immovable, motionless objects viewed rapidly in succession. It applies also to all apparent movements that can be seen if two nearby optical stimuli are presented in alternation. Kurt Kafka. He helped establish the theories of Gestalt psychology. It was Kafka who promoted this new psychology in Europe and introduced it to the United States. He was responsible for systemizing Gestalt psychology into a coherent body of theories. The last one Gestalt psychologist is Wolfgang Kohler, 1887 to 1967. He was born on January 21, 1887 and died on June 11, 1967. A German psychologist and a key figure in the development of Gestalt psychology, which seeks to understand learning, perception, and other components of mental life as structured.
So let's proceed to the Gestalt law of organizations or the principles of the Gestalt theory. So in order to us to better understand how human perception works, Gestalt psychologists proposed a number of laws of perceptual organizations. So let us first define what is Gestalt principle is.
The Gestalt principles are principles of human perception that describe how human groups similar elements, recognize patterns, and simplify complex images when we perceive objects. Designers use the principles to organize content of websites and other interfaces so it is aesthetically pleasing and easy to understand.
So it means that the Gestalt principles are the rules of organizations of the perceptual scenes. So here are the several principles of the Gestalt theory. The law of continuation. So the Gestalt continuity laws explains how our mind experiences visual lines of elements that are grouped together. There is a tendency to perceive a line continuing its established directions. Gestalt psychology tries to understand how people perceive the pattern instead of the many separate parts. This means that the mind continues visual patterns. The eye continues in the direction it is going. The principle of continuity protects the preferences of continuous figures. So for example, in this picture,
the eyes tend to want to follow the straight line from one end of this figure to the other, and the curved line from the top of the bottom, even when the lines change color midway through.
So the law of continuity posits that the human eye will follow the smoothest path when viewing lines, regardless of how the lines were actually drawn. Next is the law of closure. The law of closure is the Gestalt law that states that if there is a break in the object, we perceive the object as a continuing in a smooth pattern. So in this case, for example, we see a ball of pentagon. But because of the law of closure, our brain is going to automatically almost fill in the image and say that, oh, it's a soccer ball, even though there is no lines or rounds. We just fill in our imagination.
Another example is when you look at this image, we most likely see a zebra, even though the image is just a collection of black shapes. Our mind fills the missing information to create a recognizable pattern based on our experience.
This law of closure is understandable for us because we just fill in the objects, the missing parts of it. Another principle of the Gestalt theory is the law of similarity. The law of similarity states that elements that are similar to each other tend to perceive as a unified whole. As I've said earlier that unified means it is grouped together. Similarity can refer to any number of features, including colors, orientation, size. For instance, in the image above, there appear two separate and distinct groups based on the shape, the circles and the triangles. So we perceive that they have a similarity based on the shape.
The objects are similar, another object can be emphasized if it is different to others. This is known as anomaly and it is additional feature of the similarity principle.
Next principle is the law of proximity. The law of proximity is the Gestalt grouping law that states that elements that are close together tend to be perceived as a unified group. This straightforward law states that items close to each other tend to be a group together, whereas items further apart are less likely to be a group. For example, in this picture, we perceive that these groups are somehow related to each other, and to this group, we understand that there are differences between them. So this means that objects that are close to one another are grouped together. Next principle is the law of similarity. This law states that elements that are symmetrical to each other tend to perceive as a unified group. Similar to the law of similarity, this rule suggests that objects would be more likely to be grouped together than objects not symmetrical with each other.
As the picture shown above, it is an example of asymmetry. A monochrome version of an Olympic Lego is seen as a series of overlapping circles rather than a collection of curves. Here's another example of the Gestalt design principle of the symmetry. Our brain will interpret the image on the left as a rectangle, circle, and triangle, even when the outlines of each are incomplete because those are simpler shapes than the overall image.
The last but not the least principles of Gestalt psychology is the law of figure and ground. The figure and ground organization is a type of perceptual grouping that is vital necessity for recognizing objects through vision. In Gestalt psychology, it is known as identifying a figure from the background. So what this states that we perceive images as a figure. So figure associates with an object and the ground associate with the background. So take this image for an example.
To take this image for example, one might say that this see a white vase on a black background. So the figure here is the white vase and the ground is the black in the back. Conversely, another person might say that they see two black faces looking at one another in a white background. So in this case, the figure is the two faces and the ground is the white background.
So the figure and ground principles is perceiving images into figure as an object and ground as a background. So that's all for my discussion today. I hope that you gained some knowledge from it. Keep safe everyone.